I'm just going to make sure we're recording, which we are. We are good to go. And if you guys are ready, we'll just knock this thing out.
Sounds good.
Do it.
All right, cool. So we'll go in 3, 2. Everybody, welcome back to our second webinar for the third quarter drill. Mike Verkesh, Sean Brown, and our special guest, Dr. Peter Antevy, who's the medical director for Coral Springs and Parkland Fire Department in beautiful, sunny Coral Springs, Florida. How's the weather down there, Doc?
It's been great. A little hot, humid, but we have air conditioning, thankfully, up here.
Oh, you guys are in that 21st century up there, huh? Awesome, cool. Well, we appreciate you jumping on here, and as to kind of continue the theme of our third quarter drill, specifically looking at medical branch and some operational things, we told you that we would have Dr. Antevy on here to share some of his experiences. Unfortunately, he learned this firsthand, and he'll get into that and tell you a little bit more, but it sort of changes perspective when it happens in your own backyard. And Dr. Antevy, you were actually on the scene, right?
That's correct. Yeah. My office is just a few miles away from the event, from the high school. Actually, my wife went to that school. I have family who lives all around that area, so it's very close to home.
Yeah. Crazy stuff. All right. Well, without much further ado, why don't we go ahead and Dr. Antevy, why don't you take us away?
Awesome, Mike, Sean, thanks, and everyone listening today. I appreciate the time here. So a little bit of background, like Mike said, I'm the medical director for Coral Springs Parkland since 2015. I've been in EMS since 2010, and really this is the first time for me to be involved in such a significant event, an MCI of this size. Very little experience with any of this besides kind of hearing what other people have gone through, and hopefully some of the lessons learned that we'll talk about today will help you in your training moving forward. We don't have all the answers. We actually went against what some people would consider the standard of care, and it benefited many kids that day. And now the federal government has now used some of those things that we did in some of their new writings, and we'll talk about that as we go forward. Awesome. And Mike and Sean, you stop me at any time if there's anything that you want to expand upon as well.
Will do.
All right, so this is actually an image from Parkland, and this is in the days after the event where we had some vigils, and it's a community of just very good people, very family oriented. It's really a bedroom community. It was voted one of the top 10 places to live in America that same year, interestingly. And so before we give this presentation, I will say that this presentation was prepared by the fire department, and we always dedicate it to all the victims and their families, their friends, as well as to all the first responders, which there were many from many different departments. Of course, the teachers, all the medical professionals, many of whom actually showed up on scene, caregivers and beyond, people who were affected by this who weren't there. There were EMS professionals who weren't working that day, who were severely affected because they weren't there that day. So we learned really a lot, and hoping that this information will be useful for you and your community. And just as a small point, I gave this talk to Tidewater EMS in Chesapeake, Virginia. And if you all remember that recently they had an event. Well, it turns out that based on this talk, they had a very large kind of MCI event that they had, like a training event with their SWAT, with their PD. And they said that singular training significantly helped their efforts on the day of that event that happened in real life. So hopefully this will do the same for others.
Awesome. Thanks.
So just a quick map of Broward County, which kind of encompasses all of that area that you can see all the cities listed there. But Parkland and Coral Springs are in the top left, the northwest corner of the county. And Coral Springs is kind of a large part of that area. And then that Parkland is just a little kind of boutique bedroom community that exists. It's a newer community. It's, again, a very affluent community. And the reason I'm mentioning this is because when Parkland came to be, they wanted to go out for bid for both fire EMS and then PD. And it turns out that they got two separate entities to cover, right? They got For police, they got the Broward Sheriff's Office, and for fire and EMS, they got Coral Springs Fire. And so, why that's important is because when the response happened, it was not our jurisdiction from the police side of it. It was the Broward Sheriff. We'll call them BSO. BSO covers the entire county in certain parts. So they have a very small number of officers out there in Parkland, whereas in Coral Springs we have hundreds of officers. And when it came time to who was in charge, who was the incident commander on the police side, it was not Coral Springs, it was BSO. And that really plays out into a lot of the media that you're hearing nowadays. And we learned a lot of lessons from the operational side with respect to that whole thing, which is still being fixed. So within Coral Springs and Parkland, we have about 160,000 residents, 43 square miles, and the police department protects the 130,000 folks only in Coral Springs and not in Parkland. We just mentioned that. As far as the police department, you can see that we have a good number of officers, a very healthy SWAT team with probably more than most cities in Broward have with respect to SWAT medics. And it turns out that morning, and most of you know Dr. Paul Pepe, who's an associate medical director here with many of our cities, he was training with the SWAT medics that morning, just a few miles away. And that's why when this event happened, we had a majority of our SWAT team and other city SWAT teams at the site very, very rapidly, which would normally be not the case, right? Normally the SWAT medics aren't readily available.
So, hey, Dr. Antavi, can you talk about that for just a sec? Because what would be the normal sort of response? Where are the SWAT medics at? Are they part of the fire department? Are they police first and then cross-trained as medics, or how does that work? And what do you think? What would the normal response be?
Great question.
In a typical day?
Yeah, great question. So these are all EMS. Here we're dual trained. We're fire and EMS, and so they're all firefighters, paramedics first. And then we put them through a training so that they can join the SWAT team. And that's happened for probably in Coral Springs, even before I got there, probably already a decade we've had our SWAT medics. And these medics are typically working or not working. Right. We do 24/48s. And so essentially they're either there, and if they're there, then they would have to then kind of respond in their usual fashion. But on this particular day, they happen to be all training together. Yeah. But it's never would have happened this way. We may have gotten one or two, but not as quickly to the scene.
Right. And so did you count on, I mean, would you normally count on the SWAT medics as part of your initial response to anything? Okay, I didn't think so.
No, we don't. And it's essentially PD goes in first. Right. We have an RTF. We'll talk about that later. Yeah. In that whole process. But in this particular case, Scotty and Brad, which is our two of our amazing SWAT medics, they were in first on this particular day. Okay. We also in Broward County are unique in Coral Springs in that we have our own PSAP. And Broward County, it's also in the media, has 3 PSAPs that cover the entire county. Coral Springs decided to stay on their own and not kind of go together with them, and it turns out that they do a much better job in Coral Springs with this, and that also, without getting into the details, because we'll be here for 3 hours. I can get into it if you want me to, but essentially having our own PSAP in this particular case was beneficial. Again, great department, great training, great leadership, just a great place for EMS and fire professionals to work.
Awesome.
Yeah. So here we go. Voted 15th safest city in the nation in 2018. I said top 10 earlier, so it's vote number 15. And, again, you can see affluent community, great place to live. No one ever thought it would happen, and it did. Just so you can see on the left of your screen is the school where that X is in Parkland, again, just north of the Coral Springs border. And then the X on the right is Broward Health North, and that's the one of the trauma centers. The other trauma center is another 15 miles south of that right-sided X. So there was 2 trauma centers that we ended up transporting the patients to. All of those patients who left the scene with a pulse are now normal and living today. And that was the untold story. 17 lives were saved that day.
Hmm.
So it is very important to understand that we have been training for this for a long time. My department and my fire chief and just the entire kind of cavalry, if you will, of EMS and fire professionals, they were preparing for this. And so this didn't all go down this well by luck. So I think the training is a very, very important piece of this. And when I say that, when I gave a talk recently in Detroit with my police chief and fire chief and everyone, and I asked them the question. I said, "Hey, how did it come to be that our police department and fire department, how are we so close? You know, normally the PD and the EMS guys are kind of at each other a little bit. Here,
Sure.
they're brothers and sisters in arms." And it turns out that we had several events in the preceding years that were minor events that led them to say, "Hey, you know what? We need to be working together on this. We need to train together on this." So this is the one agency that I've been able to work with that really has a strong partnership, which is really the key. That if you guys went to many areas in the country and you went to your fire chief and said, "Hey, do you train with your police chief?" They'll probably say, "Nah, not really." I
Yeah.
think that really has to change.
Yeah. Agreed.
So again, here in 2013, our SWAT team began training with the fire department for the Active Killer Rescue Task Force response. And again, we had many drills. SOPs were created and adjusted. Lessons were learned. And again, I won't go into those prior events, but those prior events really were important. One was like an almost shooting at a school. One was where there was a gun discharge at a mall. So we did have a couple of events that really triggered us to start doing this. We also started Stop the Bleed way before other people did. And I will tell you that of interest, 4 days before the incident, myself, Dr. Pepe, Dr. Shepke, we got up on Saturday morning at 7 a.m. and we had the 5 city commissions and the mayors all in our fire department. We did Stop the Bleed training. We put them in bunker gear. We did all types of response. We spent a whole day with them. And that's just to kind of give you an idea of the type of training that we were doing prior to the event. And I think it really had a big impact on the event itself.
I'm sure this will play out a little bit, but was the school equipped with, the trauma kits or the IFAKs or any kind of bleeding control stuff that people were able to actually use? And again, if I'm getting ahead of myself, I'll stand by. But
no, you're not. You're not getting ahead. This is a great question, actually. So the other thing that we've done, and you probably read this in the media, is that we enacted ordinances in the cities to require AEDs and buildings of certain sizes. And along with the AED, we added Stop the Bleed kits. And because of that ordinance, it also required training. So in Davie, which is another city that I'm medical director for, that ordinance was already enacted. All the training was in. But the school board of Broward County is like a different animal. It's like almost being in the Vatican when you're in Rome. It's a different country. So the school board doesn't play with those rules. And so now, after the event,
of course,
they of course said, "Oh yes, now we need them everywhere."
yeah,
But even in Davie, where we had the ordinance enacted prior to February 14th,
there was pushback.
2018, no, there was not. They did not allow us to even enter to talk about this stuff.
Oh wow.
Yes, so there was a lot of pushback. Yes. But I will tell you that we've trained up probably over now 15,000 people, and this started all before this. But ever since, we're up to 15,000 people. Not every single teacher, every single school in Coral Springs and Parkland, every student has had training on this now. So we've gotten into high gear after that.
Yeah.
So you started, back to the last slide there, you started though with your leadership, or you got your council involved and went all the way up the chain?
Regarding the Stop the Bleed?
Yeah. You sound like you had them all trained up.
Everybody, and that was, again, our plan to passing an ordinance. We've learned our lesson with how to do it. We have great relationships with our commissioners, and they value what we do. But when you bring them in and show them how easy it is, and then the next thing you say is, hey, let's pass this ordinance to let everyone have this opportunity, they say, of course we're going to pass. And so every city and every community and every town should be passing ordinances. And the way to do it is very deliberately by bringing those people in and teaching them it, and then they'll pass the ordinance tomorrow. Very simple.
Yeah, makes sense.
Yeah. So now almost every city in Broward County has followed our lead, and many around the country as well, which is pretty cool. So, so of course, this is probably one of my biggest things, and I spoke about this at Eagles, is that we have to understand that in EMS, the RTF included, we are the fourth responders. And so if any of us really want to make a difference, we should never feel that or let the public know that it's EMS is there to save the day. We have to flip it on its head and say, the lay public first. You have to go into dispatch. You have to add stop the bleed policies and cards, if you will, to your dispatch and your call takers. You have to engage law enforcement. If they have an IFAC on their person, they cannot just use it on their own colleagues. They should not be stepping over people who are bleeding, which is really the case around the country. And I can tell you that in this event in Parkland, we had 5 tourniquets, 7 chest seals, all placed by not my fire and EMS professionals.
Wow. Nice.
Yep. We received them with those things.
Huh.
Right. So it was mainly our SWAT and PD. And they said, oh, another patient with a tourniquet. Thank you very much. And then we whisked them off. That was it.
Nice.
It was so that this is a very, very important point that won't happen unless you have the blend with law enforcement. And by the way, in one of my other agencies, it took us years to get to the point where we trained together, years until my medics would wear ballistic vests and helmets. Now, when it's funny, we just did another training recently in Davie, and I look there and I see police officers treating patients, and I see my medics wearing ballistic vests and helmets, and I said, oh my God, this is awesome. Like it's flipped 180. It never used to be like that before. So just a little bit of a history on MSD, opened in 1990. My wife was the first graduating class from there. Lots of students, lots of classrooms. That 1200 building, which I'll show you in an image in the next slide, is the newest building. It's 3 stories. It contained all the freshmen, essentially, and it's now one of 17 buildings on campus. And you can see here in the image that building is a 1200 building, and it's, again, brand new-ish looking building. And I'm pointing out here the east stairwell. That's where he entered from. You could see that just north of that building, there's a road. That's Holmberg. On the right side of your screen is Pine Island. And so at the corner, right under where it says east stairwell, that's where we staged fire and EMS. And right where it says school main entrance and that arrow is pointing to, that's where the sheriff ended up staging. And so you can see that we were separated. The incident command was separated.
Yeah.
And so there was an issue with that. And also, I want you to remember that northern road there, Holmberg, because that'll come into play where the shooter was on the 3rd floor, now trying to act like a sniper. And he wanted to try to pick off all the law enforcement, all the fire and EMS people, and all the students running out. And by the way, when I entered that scene, that's exactly the street I ran up, not even knowing that I could have been a target. And so we learned a lot of lessons, but we were saved by hurricane glass, and I'll show you that in a little bit. Again, here's a little schematic, and the reason for this schematic is because on the right-hand side, those little red red men walking there, those are where you can enter the school in by foot. And the top right red little thing, I'm not sure if you can see my,
we got
pointer here.
Yep.
This is the gate he entered from. So the Uber landed him right here. He walked right in, and he walked right into this east stairwell of the 1200 building. And then up here at the top, we see the cars. That's where the gates were opened by the security officer for the parents to enter to pick up their children. So you can imagine this entire street up top here was filled with parents, cars, ready to enter to come into the school to pick up their children. And then on the left side, very far out here, the students were exiting the school as they were running from the 1200 here all the way out, and they ended up at Walmart, Burger King, McDonald's. This is how they got out here. The main school office is here where I'm pointing at number 8. And this is where the security guard, and I think I have this on another slide, first noticed him walking in through the gate. And so they knew he was there right away. They had an ID on the kid. They knew he was a bad kid. They saw what he had in his hand. And unfortunately, no one stopped him in time when they could have done that. And that's why there's a whole bunch of fallout now that you've heard in the media. And I'll get into that in a little bit. So now let's get into the event itself. And so the school security monitor, he unlocked those gates, like I told you, for the cars 20 minutes ahead of dismissal. That's common practice. The shooter was dropped off at 1419, right at that first gate I showed you with the little red symbol there. And he was witnessed entering that gate, carrying that bag that you see here in the screen. And at 14:21:16 is when he entered that east door that I pointed out earlier, the 1200 building. A second security monitor spots him and then goes the other way. So again, 2 people now have seen him. Then there's a school resource officer who they're going to go get to bring him to that east door of the 1200 building. That's the guy right now who's under criminal investigation. Was brought, charges were brought to him, and there's a reason for that. And he's part of the sheriff's office, not part of Coral Springs Police Department. So here in this video, you can see that's the stairwell, and you see a student here entering, and that kid says, "You better get out of here. Something bad's about to happen." And so it's in exactly the first moment. And so I want you to remember, and I'll kind of point out the timeline along the way, that before he leaves the first floor, this is important, the school resource officer, and read that as Broward Sheriff's Officer with a gun, is right at this entrance. He could have opened that door, and he could have engaged this kid who would have been now on the other end of the hallway. You get me, right? But he wouldn't have gone up second and third floor. He would have engaged, and perhaps he would have run out the other side. So here's some video, and again, it may or may not play well for you, but at 14:28 is when he began engaging the students, and he engaged the students here. And you could see here that was from on the inside, and the students had 2 choices here. Some of them chose to evacuate and run. What happened was the doors had locks on them, and so they automatically locked. And so many of them found themselves in a hallway which is now smoke filled, and they just stood where they were because they couldn't get back in the room, and then he just picked them off. They locked the bathroom doors down because kids were vaping in the bathroom, so they decided during class to lock the bathrooms.
Yeah.
So and then he never entered any of the classrooms. He just shot the glass because the doors were locked. He shot the glass, and then he put his gun in, and whoever he could see, he got, essentially. And then all the people who were in the hallway. At 14:22, the fire alarm was activated. This was from dust from the ceiling panels and the smoke from the weapon. So essentially, people thought that he pulled the fire alarm. He didn't. It's just, you could see that room, that hallway, full of smoke. And I could tell you that we're doing some work in my house now, and kind of sawing some wood on the floor there. And just with a little bit of that particulate, the alarms went off. So it doesn't take much for the alarms to go off. So my recommendation is that when you do training, try to get smoke in the room and turn the fire alarms on so that people have a practice of doing an entire drill with fire alarms on, because that's the reality of how it's going to be.
That's good stuff.
Yeah, very important. Second floor. So it's very important that the students on the second floor all did the right thing. You can see it's empty. Not one student in there. And I'll show you a video coming up next where when he shot the glass and looked in, he didn't see anything because the students all hid under the desks closest to the wall so that without going in the room, you couldn't see them. And so here's what I'm talking about. Here's a fire alarm. They just stood still, didn't say a word. Now he was running down that second floor hallway saying, "Come out and play." Like he was trying to agitate them to come out and play. And so now the third story, before I go through this slide here, the third floor kids heard him just shooting randomly. So they ended up, let me stop that slide. They ended up evacuating into the hallway like the first floor did, had the same issues with getting back into the room and to the bathroom. And so some of those kids got hit as well. Here's in 1422, we finally began, which is about a minute in, beginning the 911 calls from inside the schools. 130 calls went to Coral Springs, and 81 went to Broward Sheriff, which is the other PSAP. Okay, so what you heard there is that, you know, again, those calls were coming in. Just a little point of fact here is that from emotional well-being, PTSD, our call takers have had a very difficult time because a lot of the kids that they started talking to, they didn't finish talking to. They heard a lot of the shooting happening. And so although we did focus heavily on them, one of them just quit, unfortunately, over a year later. Yeah. And so, again, this is a lot of the calls coming in, with a lot of parents, obviously, and some people from within the school itself. At 1427, he fired his last shot. He dropped his weapon on the third floor and then exited the building. So he was in total 8 minutes on campus. And then here's on the next photo, next slide, I'll show you the images where he tried to set up an ambush location, but failed because of the hurricane glass. And here it is. So here's the teacher's lounge, third floor. And on the left side of that screen, you can see like a track of the football field.
Yeah.
And then like right to the right of that football field is that northern road where the parents would have been waiting for their kids to come out. So that's all where, the police were coming in from and students were leaving from. So he could have gotten them from that point of view. But you can see that the windows just spidered and they never broke. So thank God for hurricane windows. Yeah. Now I'm going to kind of show you this rendition. It's going to be, there's no audio here, but there is video, and just I think it's important to see where he entered from and what he did. So I'm just going to let this run, and I'll show you at the point where the school resource officer was right outside this door, right out here, when he was still kind of here on the first floor. So I told you that there were some students. So here are 3 students walking in. Before he still has, there he is, the shooter coming in. He goes into the stairwell. Now there's one kid who just came out of the classroom, probably to go upstairs. And so he's that green dot who goes right into the stairwell. That's the video I showed you. And he says, "You better get out of here." And this kid says, "Okay, I'm not going to go up the stairs. I'm going to go that way." He goes out and he tells one of the teachers what's going on. And then here is where he starts engaging those 3 kids who just walked in. Here he breaks the glass with a bullet because those interior glass panes were not bulletproof. Then he goes to each classroom. And the reason the clock is important at the bottom is because, like we talked about before, there were people who were able to help each other, those being in the classrooms currently, if there were kits inside the room. And then ultimately the next layer, which is the school resource officer, which I'll kind of point out to you at the time where he's right outside that door. So now here comes an adult who just walked in based on the fact that a kid told him there's a kid shooting. Now, notice there were two adults who ran into that building unarmed, knowing there was a shooter. Okay, I'm going to repeat that. There was two adults who ran into that building knowing that there was a guy with a gun, and they ran in to try and save children. And unfortunately, the guy who had a gun didn't come in, and he's now facing criminal charges for that. And again, the bathrooms were not opened, so they couldn't get in. Here's another adult coming in right there, and so right about there. So right before he goes up the steps is when the officer is right outside that building. He now goes up. The shooter goes up to the second floor. I showed you this earlier. No one came out. You can see, thankfully, nobody was injured or killed on this floor. And he's looking, doesn't see anybody. He thinks they all left, right? They're all being very quiet. So when we go teach the schools, this is why I'm showing this video. They have to understand that, when fire alarms go off, you don't leave anymore like we used to. And that was a big, very, very big point here, that these 6 students on the second floor, they all saved their own lives, thankfully. So now he'll go up to the third floor. We'll see a different story where the students actually left the room, and they were all basically the ones who got injured or killed. So there you go. Then they're all leaving. Some of them have re-entered the room and hid in the right place. You see where they're hiding close to the wall so that he can't see them. And so, again, where to hide in the room is very important. So when you're teaching Stop the Bleed at a school now, it's not just how to put a tourniquet on, it's what to do when you have a code red, or whatever you're calling it, code black, whatever you guys calling it over there, and essentially to make sure that people understand that the doors would be locked and he may not be able to get in, so hide in the right location. And all the people who were in the hallway, unfortunately, didn't have a good outcome. And then on the left side, where he's coming to now, where it says 1240, DCB, this is the teacher's lounge. This is where that window was, overlooking the northern part of that road here, the football field on the left side over here. And here's where he comes in and he says, okay, now I'm going to go to that window and shoot out the windows. He's doing it right here. And he finds that that's not a success. And he realizes what's going on. So now he says, okay, I'm going to leave. So he'll exit now the teacher's lounge. He'll go back into the stairwell where he drops everything, removes the gas mask that he had on, removes the vest, the ballistic vest. And now he's wearing a hat and a red shirt from Stoneman Douglas. Remember, he was a student there. And then he exits out with all the other kids who are exiting at the same time. And here he goes down the stairs. Now he's unarmed. Now, while this is happening, somebody's in building 8 where the office is that has the video. Somebody had rewound this video, the live camera of this video going on, so that by the time PD got in there, who were communicating with Brad and Scotty, who are now, who are almost there, they're not there yet. They're actually saying to Brad and Scotty, hey, there's a shooter on the first floor. Now, the danger of that is, A, there wasn't one, but if you have 2 law enforcement coming in from either side and they were being told there's a shooter at the other end of that hallway, there could have been one SWAT team member shooting his own. So there was almost just a big disaster when they're being told information from a video that was rewound. So that was an issue, that somebody in that office had rewound the video, and we thought we were looking at some live video when we were looking at 20-minute old video. That was a big thing here.
Yeah.
And then here's a video that I'll speed up a little bit, but I want to show you. This is now from the outside. So the red dot here is a security guy, not the school resource guy. He has no gun. This guy Medina knows Cruz very well. He knows that he's a bad character. And then right here is where the Uber drops him off. You'll see him walking in through the gate here in a second. So Medina says, hey, he's on a golf cart. He sees him. This video monitor right here doesn't capture him at all. So we don't see it happening at all on video. So this is kind of a blind spot. Medina ends up kind of seeing him. I'm going to fast forward it. I'm actually going to just mute that. So Medina comes back here, and let me rewind that a little bit. Here's Peterson. He's the BSO right there in the video. Medina says, hey, this guy Cruz is in there. I know who he is. Let's go get him. And there they go. And they get onto a golf cart. And then here goes the golf cart. Remember, here he is, first floor. Remember, he backtracked to that first room again. Here he goes. And they're on a golf cart coming towards the room, coming towards the east stairwell. And you'll see the golf cart here in the video. Right there they go. Right here, and there he is. Now he's at the door. Here's where Feist, which is one of the adults, the coach, comes in. He knows that there's a shooter here. So I'm going to stop right here. You can understand now why, if you're a parent out there, why everyone is so upset. Because here he is. All he's got to do is go in, but he doesn't. And these two gentlemen knew that they were going into something bad, and they did anyway. And so I think that's really the most important part of this video. But I will show you some other parts where, and I fast forwarded it to, several officers from the Broward Sheriff's Office were out here and never entered. And so they kind of stayed out of the perimeter because their training, and Peterson was saying, let's get a perimeter. And then this video here, from an ops perspective, very important, shows about 45 seconds of the sheriff's officer, putting on a ballistic vest, when in Coral Springs, the policy is that you wear it all the time, 24/7. So another waste of about a minute here, going and getting the gear rather than, and that's the guy out here all the way on Holmberg Road. So a lot of things from the operational perspective that need to be looked at here. And so just to kind of, I'll just keep forwarding it here. Here is now Cruz, you can see, has exited the building. He's going to end up coming out and leaving here all the way on the left-hand side. And you can see that all these folks didn't enter. They just stood out there. Let me move to the next slide. After he left, again, like we said, he left his AR-15 on the third floor. And he ended up coming down and going to the subway. And then you could see here that he's here sitting with this kid who's kind of facing you. This is the brother of a girl that he shot. He's a freshman. This kid's a freshman. And this Cruz asked him for a ride home. And thankfully, this freshman said, no way, I don't know you. And that just goes to show you kind of, the emotional distress is much deeper, especially when you know things like this happened and you're just a freshman. How do you handle all this type of thing? And here's, of course, the capture, 1540, which is a good time after, because again, everyone thought he was still in the building, but in the meantime, he's running and he's out of there. And here on the left-hand side, you can see that's the school, and you can see that he ran very far. Kind of a few miles away, and that's where he was caught. And this is the neighborhood he lives in over here. So now let's get into the response. As the units went arrival, of course, we declared an MCI, and it's important that we have levels of MCI, level 1, 2, 3, 4, 5, etc. And it all depends on the level of MCI, will depend on the basic response. I'm sure you guys have something where any shooting gets a typical response, which is not an MCI response. And so once we got this all figured out, we had a significant army of people come in. And by the time those kids were coming out, we had plenty of rescues to just throw them on and just get out. So, and that was done very successfully.
So this is where I was gonna ask you a
Um,
specific question.
Many
Oops,
patients, a
shit.
lot of greens, obviously were coming out, and then there were those 17 kids who were injured, some of who got out of the building on their own, some of whom needed golf carts to get out, many of them who got treated on the inside with, again, tourniquets and chest seals, and were brought out to us on that corner, upper right-hand corner of Holmberg and Pine Island. And the bottom is very important, is that Chief Cardona is an amazing guy. He gets the credit here. He decided to not use the tarps. Not one person stepped on the red tarp, which is all we had out there at the time. And he just put, one critical and two non-criticals. And he just kept piling people on and says, you go there and you go there. And he knew exactly what the resources were at the local trauma centers. And he just did an amazing job.
So, hey, Peter.
First law enforcement entry was made at 14:32. Again, this is about a little less than 12 minutes after the start of the whole event, and you can see here that they're coming in again, still thinking that he could be inside because of the video that was rewound.
Hey, Doc.
The first patient was now being transported to the medical treatment area from building 1200. So again, that's at 14:35. So relatively quickly, again, we had a lot of golf carts there. And you can see the guy driving that golf cart is a SWAT team. And law enforcement enters the east doors and initiates communications with the officers on the west side. So here where the video is playing 20 minutes prior, and they're telling them that there's a guy at the end of that hallway. There's two officers coming in from either side. Fortunately, they didn't shoot each other. The West Side officers moved to the second floor, and then there's Brad right there without the helmet on, amazing guy, a graduate of that school, by the way. And they were the ones who were kind of putting on. Again, they have kits with plentiful tourniquets, plentiful amount of chest seals, and really amazing training to actually utilize those things.
Okay, Doc, so I got a couple questions for you regarding this particular slide right here. So initial dispatch, I was curious if you could talk a little bit about your levels of MCI, because we do have a similar kind of situation here, but I'm curious, with the levels of MCI as far as dispatch goes and the resources you get with that, was that already in play prior to this event and something you guys had trained on, or was that something that came afterwards?
Oh no, we've had that in play. So we're very fortunate here that we have my amazing fire chief, who's Julie Downey and Davey, who's our MCI guru. And essentially we have leveling of MCI. We've had that for years in our protocols. And so it's very specific as far as what a response for level 1, 2, 3, 4, 5 gets. And so that's something that is you just have to say the word, and then the folks at dispatch will send that.
So what was the initial dispatch for the fire response on this? Was it what was that?
Yeah. So at first, for any shooting, we just get a rescue and an engine. So that's it. So there was no MCI called.
Right.
But once the MCI was called, I have to go back. I think it was a 3, and I'm trying to pull up here just so I have it right. Here it is.
Sure.
I'm actually going to bring it up right now.
Oh, okay.
And I have the leveling. I'm happy to forward this to you. This is something that everyone should see. And it's interesting. When I was at the federal government at HHS working on the Asper Tracy document, they were kind of like, oh, MCI leveling? Yeah, that's probably not a bad idea. And I just kind of was raised that that's what we do.
Right.
So let me bring that up here, and
Sure.
I'll bring it into view.
Yeah, because I was just curious. And of course we'll see it when you bring it up. But so I'm assuming it's going to be on that initial company officer to sort of pull the handle on, what we're going to do based on their initial findings. Is that fair to say?
That is 100% correct. And this is right from the protocol. And you can see it's a predetermined response plan. Like you said, pull the handle. So if I'm on scene and I say I have a MCI level 2, then this is what I get. If I have an MCI level 3, so I believe that's why I said 3 here initially, right. Is because we had I believe they call that. I have to go back and check. But you can see here that very rapidly the MCI leveling was called, and that's where we went into action.
Okay. 21 to 100 seems like a big spread, but I guess, you know.
Yeah. No, you're right. But I think that the amount of units that you get is kind of can kind of capture, I guess, perhaps not 100, but at least it's a good initial response.
Yeah, exactly.
Yeah.
Okay. Awesome. Cool. Well, that was that one question I had on that, and you may get to this again. Sorry. So this is not a rehearsed thing that we've got going here. I mean, really, at the end of the day. But so you mentioned that you guys staged up on Holmberg Road in that intersection up there.
Correct.
Now, is that where you had initial? So that was a staging area. Where did you guys actually set up your medical branch? And perfect.
Yeah.
Yeah.
So everything was right here in this corner, right under the word E stairwell.
Okay.
We recognized, my fire chief recognized that there was a chance for us to get to be in the crossfire. So we had placed several engines that blocked the medical team. And so right on this corner, this patch of grass, if you can see where my mouse is, that's where the red tarp was. This is the entrance, and then the egress out was down this road, and the highway could be joined right down that road here. So essentially, the patients were being streamed out here, right to us, and then popped on rescues and gone down this road.
So at the point where you guys were in there doing this stuff, Cruz was already gone, sitting at McDonald's.
Correct.
But no one knew that, right? So
Correct.
this was definitely still a warm zone. Can you speak a little bit to maybe how you guys triaged a 3-story building with multiple patients on multiple floors, and sort of how that process went, and how did Rescue Task Force go? And again, if I'm jumping ahead, Doc, I apologize.
No, you're not.
Okay.
So this is all great questions. So basically, and again, this is nicely discussed by Brad Mock, who kind of leads the SWAT team. Essentially, that they went in and with a very kind of deliberate method and mechanism, went in and evaluated all the folks who were in each of the rooms. They had the tag system, so they black tagged all the kids that they thought should not be moved.
Right.
Lesson learned there is that the black tags should be changed to zebra, because you cannot see the black tag. And so there was not just one, but many of the children who were deceased being evaluated were evaluated multiple
times. Yeah.
So now the recommendation is zebra type tagging. And then there was also kind of a lesson learned on how to mark the door such that you knew that room had been already evaluated. Because remember, look at this campus.
Oh yeah, humongous.
They had to go into every building and every room, and there were kids who were hiding in some of these buildings, and they weren't coming out because they thought that the SWAT guys were the bad guys. And so then what was that? What was that lesson learned about marking the door? And the reason why I ask is because this is the same discussion we had at our full-scale drill in January of 2018, was what is the best way to do that? So I'm curious what you guys... Yeah, you know what? I don't know what they finally concluded, but I will definitely get back to you on this, because I have just direct access to Brad.
Sure.
But I will let you know. But they're as far as marking it, what to use to mark it,
sure,
how to mark it, and so forth. So I don't have all the details on that.
No worries.
Okay, did you want to forward back to where we were?
Yep, that's perfect.
Okay. Just off the topic here, do you want me to go back to where we were, where I wasn't answering your questions, or do you want to go back to where I ended up?
I think back to where you ended up would be cool.
Okay.
Yeah.
Okay, so we're about to get to Rescue Task Force. So let me see where I was here. So let me kind of tell one more story on this.
Yeah, absolutely.
And so the final thing to discuss here on this one is that there was someone who had self-deployed, a SWAT team member from another department who self-deployed, got to the scene, entered the scene, started reevaluating victims that were already evaluated, thought he felt a pulse on one of them, and brought them out to me and my crew who were waiting. And essentially, I ended up hopping in the back of the rescue. I ended up leaving the scene. I gave the medical control over to another EMS physician who came onto the scene as well, thankfully. And, I ended up working as hard as we could on this girl, even to the point where I did 2 finger thoracostomies because I had 15 more minutes to go en route to the hospital. And obviously all the emotional stress that goes into that afterwards, but we found to be that they did a thoracotomy on her in the ED, and her organs inside her chest were not even recognizable because of the damage that the bullet did. Remember, this guy was very deliberate, and he did 3 shots to each of those kids. In other words, they were placed deliberately in a style that wasn't random. Let's put it that way. But again, the self-deployment was a big issue here. There was no really one solid incident commander to say, you come to me and I'll tell you where to go next, because SWAT had kind of set up shop inside the school in another room. So you had sheriff in one spot, fire EMS in another spot, SWAT in a whole nother spot. And so that setup, if you will, where the incident commander for the sheriff was trying to stop anyone from going in or coming out, the Coral Springs Police Department, thankfully, didn't follow those instructions, went in and got 17 children out, which was great. So RTF. So you can imagine I'm on scene looking at my RTF thinking, why aren't we in there yet? And now I come to find it's because of the video rewind. They thought it was still the warm zone and so on and so forth. And so thank God for the SWAT guys who all were trained on Stop the Bleed. Thank God for Coral Springs Police Department who were all trained on Stop the Bleed. And thankfully they all did amazing things and brought those kids out. So and when you look back at the coroner's report, all the 17 who were deceased, there was no one in there bleeding out who wasn't addressed. You see what I'm saying?
Yeah.
They all had no chance of survival. So thankfully, the RTF issue didn't come back to bite us. Thankfully, because we trained hard on that. Let me tell you, I'm at every MCI drill pushing and saying, let's get them in quickly, and a lot of work went into that. So thankfully, the SWAT guys are really focused on what they did.
So I'm not sure if you can speak to it, you may be able to, but what was so when we did our drill in 2018, when we worked with police and I thought we had a very good drill, and it was good for the law enforcement agencies as well. But we found that there were a couple of different techniques to use as a rescue task force. One of those was sort of the room to room with your law enforcement sort of escorts, if you will, and taking care of people. And then we also discovered sort of clearing a geographical area, posting sort of security at once they've sort of gone through, because they can move a lot faster than going patient to patient. And we found that geographical clearing a geographical area, let's say in this particular case, let's say 3rd floor. They went to 3rd floor, they cleared it looking for the bad guy. There's no bad guy. Rescue task forces come in and start performing their life-saving interventions and getting people out of there. Now, what do you recall? What sort of was the story with your incident? How did that work?
Well, so I can remember that because no RTF went in there, I will tell you that all the kids were just brought out. But when we practice now, it's exactly what you said, where we go, the first room that's cleared out that seems to be appropriate.
Yeah.
We go in there, the police officers, not just the RTF, but we have officers dragging bodies into that cleared room for treatment. And then moving from room to room with any EMS personnel has to be with the RTF kind of model.
Yeah.
But for sure, what we do is we have a cleared room where we start the treatment, And then the other thing we've learned during the trainings is that when you put an EMS and a police officer together, they typically don't talk to each other. And the EMS person doesn't want to tell the police officer, hey, I got these kids in here that have to get out. Let's go, right?
Yeah.
So we have to teach them that you can talk to the police officer who's guarding your door to say, I need these kids out right now. And then that officer will then figure out a way to get you and those patients out before, let's say, the litter bearers can come in or somebody else. So in this particular case, the fact that the SWAT guys were clearing and bringing out at the same time, that was very beneficial, it turns out. So I've kind of given you, we did it this way, but we're training the other way model. You see what I'm saying? So I can tell you that this way in Parkland worked, that because there was no one room, they just fixed and they brought out kind of simultaneously.
Yeah. Okay.
I'm not sure if that answers the question, but
no, it does.
Yeah.
Yep.
Okay. And again, in under 60 minutes, we got all this done. And again, that patient at the 91st minute was the one I just told you about. But so kind of for the official record, if you will, it was a 91 minute for the last patient. But for the realistic model, it was under 60 that all the patients who were injured were transported prior to 1 hour. And again, all of those had good outcomes.
And can you tell me again, can you just remind me how many patients total were transported?
So you see that there was 19 transported because
there it is right in front of my eyes.
Yeah.
That right there. Okay.
Yeah. And remember that there were some, I have to say that the one that I transported didn't make it because she was not alive.
Right.
There was another patient who had the same thing. So of the 19, 2 of them were deceased to begin with.
Doc, do you have any stats where the hits were, as far as you were talking about tourniquets and things like that, but were the deaths caused from the chest or head shots versus okay.
So all the deaths were head and chest, all of them.
All of them.
And if you remember the image, the little video that played on the first and third floor, the kids that he was, when they were running down the hallway, those kids he was kind of randomly shooting to try and get who he can get. And he hit one girl in the chest. He hit one kid in the leg. So those kids who he didn't really have a close contact with are the ones who ended up getting hit, but not hit to the point where he was right next to them shooting them.
So he didn't really have anybody bleed out from extremity?
That's correct.
That's
a huge point. Because it all went well, they had a huge investigation and they had a huge report on the investigation. And it was kind of like when the medical part came up, someone gave a very quick slideshow and that was it. And, obviously, I think it's important for us medical people now who I know who I'm talking to understand that you never want to be the center of any investigation. And there was really nothing that they found or that we could even find that we would have changed, including the lack of use of triage tags, which I'll get to in a minute.
Sure.
Okay, so this is the slides from the doc at the hospital, the medical director, just so you can see here. Sorry for the big words here. First patient arrived at 2:55. 8th patient arrived at 4:08, and the first and 8th. So the 8th was my patient. The first patient also arrived who was deceased, but you could see that 1, 2, 3, 4, 5. The 2nd, 3rd, 4th, 5th, 6th, and 7th all were patients who were ultimately treated and released. Not I shouldn't say treated. They went to surgery and they got ICU, all that kind of stuff. And then the rest of the patients went to the other trauma center further away. Same outcomes on those patients. The only lesson I will talk to you about with respect to the hospitals is that this particular hospital, Broward Health North, doesn't see pediatric patients. And so, thankfully, my EMS chief had the wherewithal to say, we're sending you patients. They may be peds, even though they were all 16 and over anyway.
Sure.
But they all said that we don't care what age, bring them anyway. So for the people listening, make sure you discuss with the trauma hospitals. If they do not routinely see pediatrics, you have to say, if we have an MCI that's a school full of preschool children,
right,
do we have to call you? Could we just bring them there? And the answer should be just bring them here.
Right, and I think that's pretty much the way it would be. So in the Portland metro area, what we would do is we would declare an MCI to our sort of our medical resource hospital. Then they send out the word to all the other hospitals to sort of update their census and start clearing out ICU space and surgery and all that kind of stuff. Yeah, and so I think from that perspective, we're like, I think we'd be okay for that, because they know that they're just going to get anybody. Because in our area, once the MCI is declared, the trauma system as we know it sort of goes away, and then everybody's fair game.
Got it. Okay,
Yeah,
good.
yeah.
Okay, good.
I'm assuming all these were ground transports.
Everyone.
Was there any consideration or thought of doing a helicopter? I know that was a discussion about a year and a half ago.
Yes.
If we were going to fly.
So here's the issue with that is that, and now it's changed because of this, is that the helicopter that we would typically use to evacuate the injured, they were using it to look for the perpetrator.
Oh.
Right. Oh. And so they were all by ground, but I will say that, thankfully it all worked out the way that it does, but now there's a separate helicopter for that. And we had also brought in a separate helicopter from Palm Beach County. My other chopper came to help as needed, but by the time that helicopter was there to be utilized, we didn't need it anymore because all the patients were gone so quickly.
Okay.
That's a great question. Yes. And now our choppers have blood on, whole blood. So we have that live as of about 3 months ago, but our ground units really need them as well, obviously. And that's going to be the next step.
Yeah.
Again, so here's what we talked about already, so I won't go through it too much in detail, but that's the command post, and I'll show you an image, and you can see that, here's the corner. Again, we put the engine there at the bottom right of your screen.
Mm-hmm.
You can see the red tarp, never used. And you can see that this ambulance here is ready to go, and they're going to leave this way, where this ambulance is leaving.
Yep.
Let's kind of turn that corner up and go
then
right.
Gone. Yeah.
Yep.
Perfect.
Yep. So it was well done from the perspective of clearing the road, having good egress. It was good.
Were there any issues at all getting the privates involved in this? I mean, did they train along with you guys, or was the expectation that they just fall into the incident command system, go to the staging area, and this is where you're going to go?
That's it.
Okay,
yeah, that's it. Yeah. AMR was there, and basically everyone, we all play together very, very well.
Sure.
We have very, very powerful incident command structure in the fire department. Very, very good. Okay. In terms of all the chiefs, were there first. My EMS chief, my fire chief, deputy chief. It was the top brass, and these guys are just they don't just talk the talk. Trust me, they walk the walk, which is amazing.
Awesome.
They're often found first on scene to a lot of different cases. It's pretty incredible. My fire chief was first on scene the other day to a pediatric arrest. Believe that. Yeah.
Wow.
Yeah. So let's get into the MCI triage models, and this goes into this Asper Tracy document, which Mike and Sean, you may want to forward to your teams.
Yep.
It's really worth the read, but they're too complicated. They're unrealistic. A lot of confusion on the scene. Triage is inaccurate. And so you guys have all, I'm sure you start where there's, the RPM and so forth. Then SALT, which I liked better, but it kind of never gained traction here with, of course, you first sort, you do the life-saving interventions, and then you kind of go down the algorithm that way. But if you look at the efficacy of those models in prior shootings, Virginia Tech, Fort Hood, you could see that there was over triage, inappropriate triage, misuse of resources, big issues there. And we start to get into why that is. There's again, system 1, system 2 thinking. There's the physiology of fear in patients who kind of run the other way. And I think I have an image of what happened at Vegas, where you see people just scattered and they don't go to where you want them to go. And then, of course, the complicated triage algorithms. And so now I laugh when I see images like this, where this is an MCI training. It's a drill, right? Where you got the green and the red and the yellow, and everyone's sitting where they're supposed to sit. That's not going to happen in an evolving MCI like an active shooter.
For sure.
So then someone, and this is I found this at Eagles with Stein Bronstein and Sophia Dyer. They said, well, what about ramp? And again, so we don't do this yet, but it's very simple. If you have a casualty without signs of obvious death, you do the LSIs. Those are easy. And then if they can follow commands, so this is a basic GCS. If it's a yes and they have a pulse, they follow commands but no pulse, they're a red. If they can follow commands but they have a radial pulse, they're a red. The green leave without you having anything to do with them. You're gone.
Yeah.
And the blacks are blacks. And so there's only one patient population that you're dealing with, based on a GCS and a radial pulse, and that's it. There's no counting.
Oh man, I'm a huge fan of this, and I actually have this this diagram here on my phone, and I would sort of walk around and just talk to people about that, because you're right. If you go back to that slide where you're talking about, unpredictable human behavior, a false assumption of human behavior, loss of critical thinking. Like if you just ask the normal paramedic or EMT on duty, hey, what's the respiratory rate during the start triage, where you would call some, you know what I'm saying? That ain't going to happen.
Never.
That is just not going to happen. So back to ramp, I really love the fact that we're cutting out the yellows. I love the fact that you're dealing with the most critical patients, and you're identifying those much easier. Yeah. And,
yep.
And so there is now the beginnings of a movement in our area with Dr. Sani, Dr. Warden, Dr. Jew from Multnomah County, is to really start to look at this, because to me this seems like this is like
no brainer.
Yeah.
Yeah. How many MCI drills have you done where you have like the card on top of the mannequin?
Oh yeah.
And they pick up the card and they look at the respiratory rate and they got to think through a system 2 process. It makes no sense. So okay. So let's keep going. So again, the science of ramp, it builds on the GCS and a radial pulse. And as you had just mentioned about the yellow category, turns out to be the most inaccurate by EMS. Let's just remove that altogether.
Right.
And by the way, if you have no GCS and no radial pulse, your mortality rate's 92%. And that's kind of how they came up to that conclusion of using those 2 factors. So the benefits, easy to use, easy to teach, no numbers, you can remember it, good evidence, and easy to implement. So we will definitely kind of follow up with you and see how it goes with there. It's something that we would love to implement here at my shop too. I think we're primed to do it for good reasons.
Love it.
And then so just real quick, this Asper Tracy document that was just released, we spent probably a year, and then we all kind of gathered in Washington, D.C. I don't take any credit for it. I would just kind of amongst really smart people who are really experts in this field. And so the focus was on MCI, the type of MCIs that we see today. So the key takeaways, I think these are important, is that the number one, early unified command with law enforcement, and that's important. We didn't have that on our scene.
Yeah.
Of course, to reinforce everything that was mentioned and written about in Hartford. And to focus on objectives and strategies and not specifically on tactics. I think that's a big one. And you'll hear more about that at NEMSP this year. John Hick, who's the leader of that from Minneapolis, kind of really hammering these points home. Of course, stop the bleed. We're all doing that now. Making sure that the equipment that your folks inside, from law enforcement to SWAT, that they have MCI kits, pouches, backpacks. I mean, we have so many now that probably more than we know what to do with.
Yeah.
Pittsburgh wants to Pittsburgh has created bags where they come on scene, they can throw the bags to the lay people and say, here, take this and go start putting tourniquets on. So that's another thought process out there. And of course, resource commitment. We talked about the leveling of MCI.
Yeah.
They also mentioned to make dispatch ask those questions so that dispatch can have a better sense of not that it's just a shooting and send an engine and a rescue,
right?
But hey, if it's an MCI, hey, how many people do you think are there injured? Oh, 30. Okay, level 3 MCI done.
Yeah.
Then make the call.
Yeah, that makes a lot of sense. Do you guys use in your specific area? Do you use MPDS or do you use something else? Oh.
We use APCO in Coral Springs. Broward uses MPDS. In Palm Beach, I use APCO. So there's controversies about those. From the medical director perspective, I have more leeway with APCO.
Yes, for sure.
Right.
Okay.
So for the sake of time here, we'll keep going here. So the triage tags, in the dynamic triage, the transport is emphasized, not use, stop using triage tags. Is again, it's in the federal government now document. Again, for the different type of MCI where there's, it's not evolving quickly, people aren't scattering, it's a different story, then the tags may be useful there. So I'm not saying to burn them, I'm just saying not to use them in these types of scenarios.
Yeah.
So the key takeaways from Asper Tracy are that the tags have little utility, unless, again, a delayed transport, taping to identify living, if not immediately evacuating, and dead to prevent the reassessment, and use the zebra or reflective tapes rather than just plain black tape. For transport, interestingly, law enforcement transport of victims is increasing, and Philadelphia is kind of the model for that.
Yeah.
If you're going to do that, you have to educate and integrate that into plans. We don't actively do that here, but in Philadelphia, it's actively recommended. Private transport related to access and perceptions of scene safety and EMS services, and basically, there are lots of people who are. How about the Uber driver and so forth? Who's going to be coming? Perhaps those people should have also stop the bleed training, and so the gig economy and those people maybe should be trained up as well. Batch transport, which is what we did, and then improvise, like, will you transport a patient on an engine? Sure, why not? If that's the only way to do it. And also have tow trucks, and the tow truck should be deployed as soon as the event happens, and their role should be to start moving cars as soon as the event happens. No ifs, ands, or buts.
Wow.
Yeah, we learned that the hard way.
Interesting. So I like that. I think it's been our culture, at least in the Portland metro area, is batch transport has always been sort of the way we're going to do it. So just as a side note, I guess. Yeah.
And then, so just to keep going for the hospital, again, there's a lot of work to be done in this arena where EMS for secondary transport. So instead of sending all the vehicles to the scene, send them to the hospital. And if the hospital's overwhelmed and they're not, let's say, a critical patient, have the EMS transport them to another hospital where they don't need an OR type of thing. Hospitals are underprepared to triage many casualties. The process is not organized. They don't have the right tagging. Oftentimes, they don't have the right equipment. And that's where the last one comes in, where if they have 15 gunshots, do they have the right amount of trays for 15 gunshots? They don't, more than likely. And so I think that's an important one as well.
Absolutely.
Yeah. So let's kind of end it with mental wellness. In 2015, so years ago, we started, and my fire chief, again, way ahead of the game here. We had a member who had cancer, so we really started talking about these types of things. We started a healthcare safety and health collaborative, which is now online, where people from around the country now post the best practices. So please, I'll send you the website after we're done. The Florida Health and Safety Collaborative. You can just go online and you can see people from around the country. And now, instead of duplicating our efforts, you could just say, "Hey, we'll just steal yours," which is the R&D that we like to rip off and duplicate. You know it, right?
Oh yeah.
Take it all, baby. And then we have a huge presence of mental health and respect with respect to our chaplain, who's part of the department, and we have clinicians who are part of our department at no extra salary. They have Class A uniforms, so all of our firefighters and paramedics know that we have those people. So we have huge resources. We deployed the health and safety team during the event. So as part of the MCI, I would recommend that you all not just deploy SWAT and fire and EMS, but also the wellness team to the scene and to the department, to the headquarters, and to wherever the point is that the families are to go to. So these people are needed immediately and not an afterthought.
Yeah.
So again, there are a couple of videos that I'll skip there, but just the emotional well-being of our call takers, dispatchers, police officers. One of the fire chief's assistant, she was getting phone calls from people saying, "Can you go find X, Y, or Z person?" She had severe emotional trauma. So you never know who it's going to be. You could see here that we had many events following all but one of the funerals were held in Coral Springs. So imagine the repeat trauma and the repeat trauma and the repeat trauma of all of our fire and EMS who were, and the city itself. The walkouts, the rallies, the vigils. I ended up using these, what we call forts. It's a company called Forts USA, FORTS USA, where they can bring in on a trailer this building that can be opened up into a building within like 7 minutes. So I had 3 kind of complete medical tents up and running with doctors, nurses, and paramedics for all of these events. So I just had that set up, and for the weeks following, I had a really robust kind of medical plan going, which was really, really good. We ended up not having to transport, scores of people because we were prepared on the scene. Obviously, I had to change some of my protocols to allow treatment on scene of certain things. And remember, a lot of these kids are underage. So if you have an underage kid at a vigil who doesn't feel good, you have to wait for the parents to show up. So I had to make some modifications, and I had a holding room. We had a lot of things that we had to think about after this event, which I think ended up being very worthwhile, and we're very proud of how that all came out. And again, so all these observations are important, right? So meet with officials from fire and law enforcement and to discuss rescue task force. Very important. You guys are doing that. Meet with the emergency manager early on. Make use of the EOC. That's a big one. So the EOC should be up and running, not just for hurricanes and other things. The EOC should be up and running right at the same time. Social media. So there were Twitter posts. You know how, and of course I follow, you guys on social media, and sometimes Twitter will show me a post of Mike's from 2 days ago because it's gotten like 1,000 likes, and it deems it more important than the other one. So
right.
I'll see a Mike Verkes post from 2 days ago, and I'm like, oh my God, Mike's tweeting at 2 a.m. No, he's not. Twitter is just showing it to me then. So we learned that people are going on Twitter and seeing the post from yesterday of a shooting,
right.
and they thought it was another shooting.
Mm.
So every post has to have a timestamp and date on every media release. Every image has to have that.
Yeah.
That was interesting.
Good.
Yeah. All the vehicles that you have should be deployed, golf carts, ATVs, and we have a lot of those at the department. We have a Bearcat. We deployed that too. The Unified Post-Incident Mental Health Command Post that was up and running for months. So if you came to my headquarters the day after, there were, dozens of people there from different departments, but the headquarters were all based out of that. And we had a whole separate room strictly for mental health. And I utilized those services several times to my benefit, thankfully. Sufficient amount of time to be out of service and clean up and get themselves together. And I think that was good. Even though we say avoid having more than one critical patient in the back, that's what we did. We only had one critical and then 2 less critical.
Yeah. So speaking about that, I'm sure you had. Did you have a bunch of mutual aid units from other cities and counties?
Tons.
Okay.
Tons.
And so did you end up? So I guess my personal experience over the last 20 some years is that there's a finite number of those medic units that are going to transport patients, and they end up getting in sort of a loop where they transport somebody, drop them off, come back, and they get in line for the next one. Did you find that to be reality, or is the reality what you're saying here is like they just dropped off 1, potentially 2 critical patients? The friggin' rig is a mess. It's a shit show. Oh, sorry about that. Well, I'll edit that. And is it? I don't think it's the right expectation that they're going to get right back in line and be ready for more. And that's what you found, obviously.
Correct. Yeah, we had so many units show up, and we had we just have so many resources here in South Florida. We're very privileged. We work very well with all the other cities and agencies, and so that's not a reality. Although there were those members who were back and ready for action.
Yeah, of course.
Right. And then, what was interesting is those units who were told to cover the rest of the city, they had emotional issues later because they wanted to be there. They wanted to help. The folks who weren't on shift that day, we do ABC shift. The folks who were not on shift that day were upset because they weren't there to help. So there was a lot of different reasons for people to have a significant emotional toll on them.
Yeah.
And again, these are all things that when you think about it, you're like, yeah, that makes a lot of sense.
Yeah.
Really have to talk about these things beforehand.
Yeah.
Again, this is where the tow trucks come in, and you can see here the number of vehicles that were there that didn't have to be there. So the tow trucks is really what this slide's all about. Patient tracking, of course, this is always a big issue. We are now looking at another mechanism for patient tracking that can kind of, because there's different agencies transporting to different hospitals, and just to get all that information together. And then can't tell you how many phone calls I got from parents of children that I knew saying, where is my kid? And I don't have the answer to that.
Yeah.
No one had the answer to that. So now that we said, hey, they either go to the hotel, which is the reunification point where we had, or they're at one of these two hospitals. So what did parents do? They were driving 150 miles an hour to each of those sites, and then crying at the door, "Let me in!
Right.
I want to know." And it was a disaster. Not good. Let's put it that way. So know the facilities, talk about all these things, figure out how you're going to track patients afterwards. Again, social media is very important to report incidents and additional information. We use it very wisely. We have someone who does that for us all the time. Our PIO is very good with that.
As do we, yeah.
Okay, good. Yeah, with someone like you in that area, you guys are really good.
Yeah, no, it's not me.
Right. Work with fire prevention, come up with alternative to traditional fire alarms, code red drills, and processes for evacuation or shelter in place. So not every fire alarm should get an evacuation, and that was a very, very important piece there. Even if you see outside that there is smoke doesn't mean it's a fire that I have to leave for. So again, a lot of work has to be done with respect to that. And then, of course, meet with your schools, figure out how to integrate. You should have the floor plans for the schools prior so that you know exactly what everything is. And I think that we had very good knowledge of the Stoneman Douglas prior. But that's just another point of note. How will school board officials integrate into the command structure? Which is, and then I think I may have this in another slide, but we had a lot of the commissioners show up on scene. Hello, what are you doing here, right? So you have to figure out a way of kind of letting them know that you don't need to be here right now, because once the news cameras show up, guess who shows up next?
Oh yeah,
school board and city commissioners, and they all fight to get to the microphone, right? Yeah. So victims will use alternative methods. It's happened in Vegas. And so everyone should be prepared for that. No one's they aren't going to wait in line for the next ambulance to come.
Right.
From the police side of things, crossfire, radio communication was a big disaster. Bullet holes through a third-story window cause a concern for sniper ambush, and my guys knew that coming in. As they walked up, they saw the holes, and they knew it, but nobody else would have known that. And there were students, just like in the Fort Lauderdale shooting at the airport. People were hiding in closets. One person tried to hide in the police officer's rescue vehicle, and by the way, had a German Shepherd in there, and they got bitten up. They started bleeding. People thought there was another victim. There were more reports in 911. A guy's bleeding outside the cop car. And then the disaster just got worse, right? That was at the Fort Lauderdale airport.
Wow.
That's why the sheriff's not there anymore. And then, again, treating wounded students. And remember, all the slides, by the way, I should have mentioned that were in blue, are related to police officers. And so our police officers did an amazing job. They get significant amount of credit for the saves here. Again, the clearing is a massive undertaking. Searching, all the backpacks were put into one place, and guess what was in the backpacks? Cell phones. So for hours, those backpacks were just ringing. The cell phones were ringing, and if you ask those police officers, one big part of the emotional toll is that they heard the backpacks ringing, and they weren't sure, is this kid dead or alive? And oh my God, I have a child that age, and if their backpack was ringing, and it just took people to whole different directions. it was really bad.
That was a similar situation that probably at most of these, Vegas included, but Pulse nightclub for sure, that the cell phone thing was super, super hard for people.
Yes, 100%. And again, it's those minor things that you don't think about until it happens to you. And here they are. Here are the backpacks. And sorry for the blurred picture, but it's the best we could get from the helicopter. Hundreds of backpacks. Remember those 1,000 kids, I think, in that building alone, or I think it fit 900 students. And so you could see how many hundreds of backpacks are all ringing. And every one of those people walking around there has emotional trauma from that. So just to come to a close here, the last patient was treated, we told you 91 minutes, but really used the 60-minute mark is what we did, and it was very effective. And of the 19 patients, 18 suffered gunshot wounds. And so, at the end of the day, our community has resilience. Our community has worked through a lot of these things, but a lot of the reason that we're able to kind of move ahead is because we all go to sleep knowing that we were well trained, well prepared. We had the right post-incident wellness strategies, and we've just had some amazing events at the city level. Just real quick, and I probably should have had this video up for you guys, but Michael Bloomberg gave $1 million to a foundation, and they're doing 5 kind of post events, and one of them they built a big temple called the Temple of Time. It's a big wooden temple built by David Best, who is a guy who builds the structures at Burning Man. People went in, they put all of their belongings that they wanted to just kind of get away and just release themselves from. And then on May 19th, just over a month ago, we had 34 torches. And the beauty of the 34, it was for the 17 deceased, but also for the 17 who lived. 34 people were designated to go and light that temple on fire, and the whole thing burned to a crisp. Very emotional, very amazing event. But that's just kind of the healing that has to happen so that we never forget those people who lost their lives, and all the folks who have lost their lives since then, either from suicide or others. So very emotional, very tragic, and our heart still goes out to all the folks who suffered the real damage here by losing loved ones. But I will tell you that coming on these types of educational processes also helps us educate others, and if we can help avoid what happened in Chesapeake and Virginia Beach with a presentation like this, we're very honored to do so. So Mike and Sean, thank you for having me.
Absolutely. Thank you so much. Mike, you there? Oh.
Yep. No, I was there. I was on mute. Jeez Louise. Yes. Anyway, Dr. Antevi, thank you so much. I know we were coordinating for the last couple months trying to set this up, and I appreciate you taking the time out of your super, super busy schedule. I know you probably just got back from another conference somewhere, but again, we appreciate it so much. And personally, great to talk to you again, my friend.
You too, Mike, Sean. Thank you so much. And if there's anything else you need, any further presentations, or if I'm up in that part of the world and you see value in bringing me in to do the same thing, I'm happy to do so.
Perfect. And one thing I would love, would you mind sending me that your MCI level dispatch sheet protocol? That'd be awesome. Cool.
And then this, is there any reason that you would need this PowerPoint? I only say that I got to be cautious, and let's be off the record on this one.
Yeah. Yeah.
My fire chief doesn't want this really being spread anywhere.
Oh, no, for sure. Yeah, I don't think we need it for anything. So,
okay.
Yeah.
All right. Good.
Yeah.
Okay. Good.
Perfect.
All right. So I will send you that MCI thing right now, and that you can use as you wish. And,
perfect.
And then ask for Tracy. You have the document.
Yep.
Right?
Yep. I went on and found it. Yep.
Sweet.
Awesome.
Okay.
Cool. All right. Thanks, Doc.
All right, guys.
All right.
Yeah, thank you very much.
Well, I'll see you. Take care.